Like a lamp shining in a dark room, this philosophy was supposed to open the eyes of the world's poor and free them from their unjust rule. Excited writers and poets believed the spirit of it could lift the world from an age of darkness and ignorance into a world of science, rationality, and equality. The philosophy spread throughout the European continent and even contributed to the American Revolution. Of all the countries, France most eagerly embraced the ideas of this new philosophy, but what started as a movement for reason, rationality, and brotherhood turned into hysteria and slaughter during the French Revolution. 3 centuries ago, 5 men on a quest for diplomacy and equality sparked a debate influencing much of modern thought. Their successes and failures collaborated to question the need for a divine ruler and started the revolution of a more intelligent people. The remaining consequential differences gave rise to reason, which is advocated as the primary source for legitimacy and authority. 5 men, on a post-Renaissance journey to bring education and intellectual thought to the common people, truly shed light on the Age of Reason, dawn of enlightenment. The Enlightenment grew popular throughout Europe during the 18th century. To its supporters, the Enlightenment was much more than a philosophy. It was a way of thinking that stemmed from faith in human reason and progress. Enlightenment thought was the culmination of many scientific advances, such as Newton's laws of gravity and writings from Europe's most famous thinkers. These supporters believed that humankind was coming out of ages of darkness and superstition. They foresaw a future where all people were educated and free, and liberty reigned as the supreme law of the land. Ideas and speeches were quickly spread like a virus through the country. Pamphlets, essays, and newspapers filled the streets of Europe, all forwarding a new and brighter era, the Age of Reason. Enlightened thinkers advocated that through the wings of reason, humanity would advance and ascend to a wonderful world. Coming from different backgrounds, these thinkers represented a collection of various differing opinions and debates. There are 5 main authors and prominent thinkers of the time, such as the author Niccolò Machiavelli. Machiavelli was born on May 3, 1469 in Florence, Italy. He is associated with corrupt totalitarian government. The cause of this is a pamphlet he wrote, dubbed as The Prince, about government. The political genius of Niccolò Machiavelli was overshadowed by the reputation that was unfairly given to him because of a misunderstanding of his views on politics. He met many great men, but none had greater influence on him than Caesar Borgia, Prince of the Papal States, one of the great Italian city-states. Borgia was a cunning, cruel man, very much like the one portrayed in The Prince. Machiavelli disliked Borgia, but he believed that a man like him was needed to unite Italy. When the Medici family took over Florence, he lost his office. The lack of a job forced him to switch to writing about politics instead of being active. His diplomatic missions were his last official government positions. In an attempt to gain the favor of the Medici, he attempts to write a book of what he thought were the Medici's goals and dedicating it to them. Here marks the inception of a legacy to be fostered ad infinitum. The descriptions within The Prince have the general theme of accepting that ends of princes, such as glory and survival, can justify the use of immoral means to achieve those ends. Unfortunately, the Medici didn't agree with what the book said, and when the public saw the book, they were outraged. People wondered how cruel a man could be to think evil thoughts like the ones in The Prince. Later, however, it would become a universal manual for the growth of government. Baron de Montesquieu was a lawyer, noble, and member of the Parliament, and was a revolutionary figure of his time. Although he was living comfortably within French society, he saw the need to reform. He published the Persian Letters in 1721, satirizing contemporary institutions. More enduring was The Spirit of Laws, arguably the single most influential political work of 18th century. Enforcing the British Constitution as the ideal model of government, many historians advocate that it was this work that led to the revolutionary idea of separation of powers. Arguably the most eminent of these thinkers was a Frenchman, Jean-François Marie Arouet, more commonly known as Voltaire. A writer, playwright, poet, and scientist, this man was also a friend to various leaders in Europe. Voltaire was known to disguise sarcastic humor in his writings to criticize those he did not agree with, and oftentimes without their knowing. He became the most admired and also most feared writer of the 1700s. His main enemy was the Church, he attributed to corruption and inhibition.
There is a conflict because the Catholic Church teaches that there is a God.
John Locke, a great contributor to the Enlightenment, and believed that humans were born completely free of personality and character. Let us suppose the mind to be, as we say, white paper, void of all characters, and without any ideas, Locke proposed in one of his numerous essays on the subject. Locke believed that experience and observation created knowledge, and his ideas supported Enlightenment thought. He believed that if attitude and character could be taught, then humanity could be shaped into a whole new form of society, one based on justice and reason. Many other great thinkers, writers, and scientists preached the ideas of the Enlightenment. These philosophers included Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, who brought Enlightenment ideals into the American Revolution. Across the ocean, many Europeans watched as America fought against what it considered the unjust rule of Britain. When the Americans won the war, they set up a government based upon Enlightenment ideas. Instead of a monarchy, the Americans created a government where leaders were chosen by the people. To many Europeans living under the rule of a king or queen, the American Revolution served as an example of the success of the Enlightenment thought. Nowhere was this message better received than in France. France in the late 1700s was not a very happy place to be. Most of the French people lived in deep poverty and had very little to say in their government. The King of France, Louis XVI, had problems of his own. The country was deeply in debt, partly from helping the Americans in the Revolutionary War. Louis tried to fix these problems by increasing taxes, and while this may have seemed like a good idea, most of the wealthiest people were not forced to pay taxes. Instead, the burden fell to the poor people who were already struggling to feed their families. Louis is not a bad person, but he was a bad king. He did very little to help the suffering of his people. In fact, his wife Marie Antoinette lived a very lavish life. She often bought 3 or 4 very expensive dresses a week, and one of her favorite pastimes was gambling away large amounts of the king's money. Money he took straight from the almost empty treasury. Beneath the king and queen was a small upper class of extremely wealthy nobles. They had very little purpose and spent their time living in luxury, while the average citizen suffered greatly from poverty. Thomas Jefferson, who once served as an American ambassador to France, described the state of the French people when he commented, "Out of a population of 20 million people supposed to be in France, there are 19 million more wretched, more accursed in every circumstance of human existence, than the most conspicuously wretched individual of the whole United States." It was in these circumstances that the Enlightenment thrived. The American Revolution proved to many people in France that the philosophy of Enlightenment could create an ideal government. Using Enlightenment theories, they began to loudly criticize their government and ruling class. Eventually, this discontent would spawn the French Revolution. And while the American Revolution influenced much of the French Revolution, the Enlightenment contributed to much of the American Declaration of Independence. Jefferson took 2 of the main ideas from Enlightenment thinker John Locke as a guide in the Declaration of Independence. He stated that, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. These among them are life, liberty, and the right to property." The third law was changed into pursuit of happiness by Jefferson. Other Enlightenment thinkers had ideas on separation of powers, checks and balances in government, and how to best represent the masses with a representative democracy. The Enlightenment philosophy gave the suffering people of France something to believe in. It spoke of justice, freedom, and reason when they had none. More than anything, the Enlightenment sparked a massive awakening that would lead to the cry of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Like King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and thousands of other French citizens, the Age of Enlightenment died at the hands of the guillotine. What began as a philosophy of reason and justice ended in waves of blood and terror. Other kings and queens of Europe, fearful for their lives, quickly stifled Enlightenment ideas and writings, and the philosophy soon faded into history. Though the Age of Enlightenment came to an end, its ideas continue to influence current culture. Encouragement of scientific achievement, reason, and progress is as true today as it was all those years ago. Perhaps more importantly, the fight for equality and justice continues to this day all over the world.